Hello and welcome to Wrapup API Expression. It's the 18th of August 2020. And does anybody have something to add for the agenda before we start? I hear silence. All right. I added this after Daniel mentioned it or mentioned us on GitHub. There was the question for how people could validate API types that are being used from our Go types, like if you use the pod spec in your CRD, how you could validate that. And it was discussed a bit in here, and then somewhere here, Daniel said we should look at it, or we could look at it, and I just added it. So I don't know if we want to discuss it today, but I added it in case there's energy to discuss it. I know I've had the question while building a CRD, so.
I would at very least like to note that like the suggested solution of like just call Dryrun isn't particularly user friendly. Like there's a relatively high activation energy for setting up a validating webhook. Like even with tooling to help you, like there's a lot of extra things to coordinate there. So like while that is like technically viable, it's not the best.
Yeah, and that also would mean that like if the validating webhook had to do a dry run to validate something, it would mean another request to the API server for that in the same process, right? Without really understanding what's going on with the types, but I thought there is a we have to generate schemas for everything, but we can't always validate on it because validation is kind of messy. Is Joe here? Did you look at validation for a bit?
I did. I started to try and audit the validation across a bunch of built-in types to understand, like, my goal was just to understand what kind of validation we're actually doing in the functions that are handwritten in the Kubernetes code to see what patterns are, what could potentially be like transferred from being handwritten functions to being declarative declarative information on schemas that could be then leveraged by anything that consumes OpenAPI. There is a lot of stuff that could go through. Like everything I looked at, there was a fairly substantial percentage of the validation rules were really bucketed down into really simple things that you could easily express with OpenAPI, right? Like a lot of them are actually these kind of formatted rules. I expect this string to adhere to this formatting rule, like some DNS name rule, or some kind of quantity or time or something like that. That was really common. There's also a long tail of stuff that you can't get to, which gets all the way into like multi-field cross-checking type of rules. But the vast majority was still like pretty straightforward stuff. And probably of value to anybody that wants to know about it in an OpenAPI spec, if we could express it there.
Yeah, it would be like I had a comparable situation with the status wiping stuff. It would be pretty cool to have, I guess it's quite some work to compile, but to have a list of things or a general overview what we already could do, like if it's worth the trouble, if it's the majority of fields and then mostly fields that are commonly used or types, because then we could show that we could implement that.
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet that's just my notes, and so it's not really probably consumable from other people without all my like knowledge of the way I was like just pasting stuff into it. Yeah, I'd started to compile that together. I'd love to get back to it. I've kind of pushed my stack pretty deep with other urgent things, which is unfortunate. But if somebody did want to take this on, I'd be happy to spend a couple hours with them, brain dumping what I've looked at so far. And help them ramp up, or I could circle back on it later. I think we could get a ton of mileage about putting stuff into OpenAPI based on what I've seen, but maybe in a future meeting I could try and go over my findings so far in more detail. I could try and organize it.
How related is it to the stuff we're doing for defaults? Because we're also adding stuff there.
I mean, there's a symmetry to like a lot of fields have defaults and a lot of fields have validating rules. So I feel like there's like this kind of like they're both these things that you might want to annotate about a field.
Yeah.
I feel like the validating ones, many of them are actually even more basic because like a lot of them are just very simple. Like this string is not just a string; it's a string that it may only contain an X ever. And so it's very straightforward. So I consider validating to even be a more basic thing in at least a couple of the validating classes of validating rules are just really simple and should just obviously be in the spec. There's multiple classes of them, right? Like not all validating rules are simple, but there are a bunch that really are. In fact, really, you could argue from a type perspective that some of them, the type's not even really a string. The type is something else, and it just happens to be represented as a string. We don't currently think of it that way, but
there's a couple cases where I think we've had like minor discussions. I've had minor discussions with folks before. Stuff like resource.quantity should probably be like a format or something like that.
yeah.
It is technically possible to validate using a regular expression. The regular expression is, or it's at least almost fully possible to validate using a regular expression, but it's real hairy.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we have to decide to do is how do we express these in OpenAPI?
Actually, I should clarify. It's impossible to properly resource.quantity itself is actually impossible to properly declaratively specify because it's actually, according to the API server, the way the API server is supposed to accept it, it's int or string or float. And the float gets converted back into a string, which is not something that can be represented in CRD structural schemas.
Yeah, I think that puts it in a class that's a little harder than some of the most basic ones. There's a bunch that are literally only ever a string. Interstring is definitely not, but there are some that's like a lot of like these DNS name ones, like there's a simple rule. I don't know if it's a regex rule, so I don't know if we could do that. But yeah, that makes me wonder, like, how do we express things that don't go to regex? Do we just have some way of saying, like, I know this field is an X, and every client needs to figure out how to validate an X if they care, or?
Yeah, I mean, we can like we could probably put annotations about validation on the type itself.
Yeah.
Similarly to the way controller gen and controller tools expects it.
That sounds pretty reasonable.
I think the hard thing here is I would be surprised if we don't discover a few more cases like resource.quantity where it's like just we've constructed rules for our CRDs that mean we literally can't express built-in types in CRD OpenAPI. Which, like, I'm wary of solutions that just involve what we do today with more OpenAPI. Like, that's a good starting point, but I have a suspicion that we're gonna need to tackle something more complicated eventually.
Yeah, I'm worried about that too. It feels like OpenAPI was selected as a thing it could work without any like really rigor to determine whether or not there's like a fundamental impedance mismatch there. And I don't know. I feel like there's a abstract notion of a schema that's kind of hidden behind everything that would make sense that we're just trying to like materialize out into this more constrained format.
Where does the kubectl client-side validation come from? What does it do? Does somebody know?
Client-side validation. Do you say client-side validation?
I can't speak to it. I've never really spent any time with it.
Client-side validation is pulled from the OpenAPI spec published by the API server, but it's not all of the validation, right?
Okay.
It's not. In fact, there's not nearly as much of it as what we do server side.
All right, so it's already we provide something, but it's already incomplete, and we will also improve on that if we fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have something to add, or should we go to the status update?
I definitely feel like that's an area where there's some help wanted, so we might want to make a note of that explicitly.
Yeah.
Right now, I think we've got like
Yeah.
I think we all can agree that there's a lot to be done there.
Yeah.
Nobody actually really dedicating time yet, as far as I'm aware.
It's not a small task, definitely.
No, it's really not. But there are different sizes of useful tasks that could potentially be done there.
Yeah.
You could kind of bite off as much as you can chew and have plenty to do.
Cool. All right, we have the defaulted associative keys are missing, and Anton is cited, and I think I saw him on. No, left. He said he doesn't know if he can talk much. So
I know there was a early version of a cat being worked on, so there's been quite a bit of progress on this.
all right, that's great. Status wiping. I spent a lot of time on Saturday to finally get most of the types done. I still have a problem with CRDs and CRs that don't behave as I expected them to behave for an unclear reason so far. I'll have to look into it again. But aside from that, it looks almost good. I still have some stuff to do, like adding the code that decides which fields to disable for pods based on features. That's a lot of features pods can respect when wiping fields. It's a bit messy. But yeah, there was some progress. If you want to look at it, the PR is
great.
Here.
Is there anything that you're blocked on review for?
The CRD is working, and well, there's and plus stuff. So there is still some open stuff, and I wrote in a comment in the PR somewhere. It's highly recommended to review commit by commit, because every commit contains one resource that's being changed. Otherwise, you'll have to read through a lot of files. It's not really enjoyable. But if you want to look at it, I wouldn't mind. A few more pairs of eyes. API clients.
So we took this to API machinery, and I think we got some good feedback there. I'll just give a 30-second summary, which was we would like to see a prototype using the builders. We're not exactly sure what the formulation of that would be, but like basically somehow use the builder pattern. Don't do it in K8s yet as like an official thing, but build a prototype somewhere. Identify community members. I remember Sully had mentioned last time that some of the controller runtime group might be willing to try things out. So I think the goal is to find people that are willing to try it, get them to actually try it, get meaningful feedback, and then then iterate from there. So
Should
Jenny,
should we request a repo for that and build it outside the main repo?
Jenny was thinking of doing it in controller tools. I haven't any opinion about that yet, but if you have an opinion, talk to Jenny, and we'll kind of identify. I don't think we're going to build a new repo at this point. I think we might just try and like open a PR that we don't merge into another repo for now, and get started that way. So
we can also give you a feature branch if you'd like in controller tools. We've done that before for a couple other major features, and it's worked well.
That sounds great.
Yeah, a feature branch would probably be better because you can import it easily from Go.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, I'll make sure that gets mentioned to Jenny.
Great. Field tombstoning. Here again.
Yeah, also took this to API machinery, and the feedback was we would like to see a couple alternative designs and how they work out. So I'm going to try and sketch those up this week. One would be to put the tombstone information into the unmanaged fields data directly, so that you don't modify the main object, but you just extend what the managed fields data has. The other one was to have some kind of like negative object representation that represents everything you believe should be excluded from the object as like a separate YAML. So like -- more YAML or something in the request. I don't know. It's just a brainstorming idea. I'm going to look at both of those ideas and update the doc, and then I will circle back with everyone.
I thought I didn't think about the -- more YAML. I thought it was meant as a field that contains those information and gets not persisted. But
okay, I think maybe both were on the table. I think there was even a third one that Antoine was thinking, where you even had like a different like object that you modified that was the negative. So I think there's multiple different ways to express the negative object. Maybe I will list out the alternatives and see which one maybe works out as the most pleasing of those three. And then we should have three major designs to consider, all which are probably going to have downsides, but at least we'll have alternatives.
Yeah, I added a suggestion to the doc yesterday, I think, because I had to think about customize and other tools that might do validation we might break with Tombstone. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I was out yesterday watching for Sick Kid, but I will read up and get back to you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. I saw some more comments on the career plan for executive fields. I think talks there are going on. If somebody's here who wants to discuss it more, now's the time.
My only thought, and I think this is already expressed a little bit, was that there seems to be two problems being solved. One is just that how do you deal with the basic like optimistic concurrency problem of conflicts, and then the other one is kind of this bigger like how do you support some kind of plan feature. I don't know nearly as much about the idea of a plan feature, but I think Antoine has proposed I think a fairly simple kind of optimistic concurrency control mechanism, which is basically very similar to how we'd already do it in an update, except for that our token is not the resource version, it's some other token. I kind of like that. I don't think anybody's working on any of this right now. I think people are just kind of weighing in.
Yeah. No. I read the suggestion. It kind of sounds a bit like you're sending like caching. You send a hash you saw before, and if it doesn't fit, something else happens.
Yeah, then you know you're not making the change you originally thought, and then you should read again, figure out what you want to do, and retry.
Yeah, I like that as well. All right, then let's keep the discussion open. And let's see, is Tim or Mike here? No, so I think we have no update on the documentation. I'm pretty sure the same counts for topology. I didn't see a PR or anything about it to update the docs. Is Jenny here? Do you know, Joe, do you know if there was progress on the structural schema stuff?
I don't have any information on that.
Okay. Nodo, I saw your PR is getting close to finish. There we go.
Yeah,
Do you need
just
anything
misses. I think it's pretty much done. I think Daniel reviewed it yesterday, and I don't know, a new comment, and that should be it. Let's see if it's going to be merged as soon as the last review is made.
Yeah, and we need to wait for the milestone. That's I read an email today. I think it's in a week. They make a break, and then it's a week. Yeah, awesome. You were asking about the sub-resource stuff. I don't know if it's on here now. No. So I remember some parts about the scale sub-resource. What was it?
Yeah, I've just picked that at random, basically, because it reminded me a little bit of my work in that. But
I came across it to do in the code while adding the status sub-resource stuff to CRDs, and I really don't remember what it was. I guess Antoine might remember it. I don't know if we have any other stuff explicitly marked that help needed. Also higher up, maybe. Yeah, that's all way more complicated. I would say we follow up on Slack because I can't think of anything on my own right now.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
I'm lost here. Yeah, this one is an expert help needed. We don't have anything new on it, I think. What is that? Oh, it was the pod selector. I think so. It's the defaulting stuff. No, it falls under the tombstoning, right? Like somebody applied the empty pod selector and nothing got applied.
Oh yeah, so I've actually been working directly on this. Sorry, I was looking at something on your screen. Yeah, so I have a PR that fixes this, and we were about to roll it out into Kubernetes when we made the observation that existing data. So if you've already done an apply and then I change this annotation on the type, that you end up in a bit of a weird state. So I'm following up with that. But basically what's going to happen is you're going to be able to annotate directly on any struct that is an atomic. You can't annotate on the references or the usages of it. That's true today. So we're just adding the ability to directly, like say, a label selector is a struct, is an atomic struct. What that means is when you modify a label selector, you modify the whole label selector. It turns out that they don't merge very well. They're fairly atomic as a unit. Like we don't expect collaboration on them. So I think it all makes sense. But there I'm prototyping to see if I can fix the problem where if somebody had applied a label selector before we make this change, and then we make this change, that we don't end up like orphaning a bunch of field data forever, and we don't end up like missing conflicts that we should have gotten. So I'm trying. I have a prototype that seems to work, but it's like requires doing another pass on data every time we do an apply to basically fix up the managed fields if the schemas happen to have changed. Which is kind of annoying. The general problem here is we have a gap where in apply, we don't really deal with the fact that you can make unchanged, you can make unversioned changes to schemas. Like you can have V1 of a schema and go in and change certain things about it. And some of those are actually pretty valid changes that are really going to happen, especially in series. And when that does happen, the managed fields become out of sync. So this is a manifestation of that problem, a very specific one. And so I'm going to do a prototype. I'll come back and let people know that kind. But I think this is fixable. It's just a question of how cleanly we can do it.
So would that mean we should, would help to have like a version, our own version or hash of the currently used schema in the managed fields? Or would, well, that would be a lot.
Yeah, that's one of my proposals, is that we somehow, like, basically in the managed fields, that in addition to saying which version you're at, like v1, we also have a hash of the exact state of the schema, because then you could check to see if anything about the schema has changed, and only then you could like apply certain like amount of fix up. Now there are certain changes. No, CRDs are nasty because you can basically change the schema in almost any way that you want. And some of those are just going to break the world, right? In ways that are beyond even apply, right? Like you can make the object in etcd completely invalid. But at least for a subset of changes which are legal and are pretty sane, like, oh, I forgot to make this thing atomic, let's just fix it. Those kinds of changes, like some of them are possible to fix up, and for those, I'd like to see if we can actually do something reasonable. Because the problem we're having in Kubernetes with label selector kind of highlights that, like, we don't always get this right, and when we do have it wrong, we probably need a way to fix it.
Mm-hmm. And the annotation, you mentioned the annotation goes on the type definition and not, so if a CRD uses some internal type that is not declared as atomic but wants it atomic, that's not possible.
Yeah, well, it depends on what it is. So right now the rules are if it is a plain map, or if it is a plain list or a set, then you mark it on the usage. You can only mark it on usage, which makes sense because, like, that's kind of how it works. But if it's a struct right now, you can't do anything. And so what I'm doing is planning to initially just add support for adding the annotation on the struct itself, because I think that's usually what you want. Like, you defined a struct, you defined a formal type. Like, you should be able to say how that type works. In the future, if we ever needed to say at the usage, if the rules should be different, we could add support for that later, and then we'd have to figure out what the rules are for if there's a annotation on both the usage and the struct itself, if there's like a priority rule or if that's a conflict or what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't really need to deal with that, so I was going to do the basic thing of just add support on the struct itself.
Okay, sounds good. Should we note though? No, I think it comes up every time we discuss it. So
yeah, yeah, and this is what I'm actively working on. So I was working on this right now.
Okay. There's open issues about stop tracking, start tracking. Is Julian here? Yes. Julian, did you do it?
That one is closed now.
All right. Is everything?
Yeah, we just wanted a test in, and it seems like it's working.
That one is open. I think, yeah, you're also waiting on the merge, I guess. All right. Looks good. Then let's move it to, where's our done stuff? All right. Oh yeah, that's just an interesting piece somebody's working on. So it's applied in a Java client, and Anton and I still have to do something. All right. Invalidation right teaching that's still open. There is a PR for that. And it's merged. Has anyone tried that? Do we really have no managed fields anymore in kubectl edit? That would be amazing. I have to try it. Okay. I think that's it. Noda will follow up on Slack, especially if Antoine has something that he comes up with for you. And if nobody else has something to add, well, yeah, I think we're done.
Great.
All right. And
Cool.
thanks for coming by, and have a great morning.
Yeah. Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.